My name is bettridge-wiese. I am a technology consultant based out of Champaign. I work for a company called Two-Wave, that's us. I'm the chief operations officer there, but I studied music in undergrad, and then I studied human resources in grad school. And I'm the kind of person that finds a master's degree in human resources exciting. So one of the things I really liked studying human resources was studying teams and their functions and how groups work, the interpersonal dynamics within them. It's a big part of my consulting work, actually, with clients and within clients, so either working with them or helping facilitate their own teams. So done badly, group decisions get just like literally nothing, right? If you do it well, you can save a bunch of time and a bunch of mental energy, and you can come to the best decision, or in many situations, at least the least bad one. So the focus of my talk today is mostly going to be how you can reach these group decisions. Now, this all sort of rests on one key principle for me, which is, I don't think, particularly controversial. Groups get the best results when they hear from a diversity of opinions. That's it. So this whole talk rests on 4 core values that serve that goal. And everything you hear from me today is in service of these 4 core values. First, decisions should be made with input from the whole group. Second, every member of the group should have an equal voice. Third, conflict is inevitable, but harm is not. And fourth, participants should be actively engaged in achieving these goals. So the thing about this talk is, I acknowledge that there are a lot of groups where you don't have an equal voice, right? But the focus of this is groups that need to come to decisions together, rather than groups where there is, say, a boss who the various subordinates are trying to convince. Before we get started, I do want to say one thing. The way that we make decisions as groups is built on millennia of entrenched power structures that privilege certain people and behaviors and marginalize others. The people at privileges basically look and act like me. And so, by default, when we use those power structures, when we use the same decision-making structures that we have for basically most recorded society, we don't meet those values that I just listed. And it doesn't have to be that way. By far, the most important thing I want you to learn today is this. If the rules of the game prevent healthy collaborative decision-making, change the rules of the game.
Adrian, I'm really sorry. Can you go back to your core values really quick? Just because I really want to make sure I write them down so I can root everything as you go through in those things.
Sure.
Is that okay? Thank you. I really appreciate it. It'll take me 20 seconds. Thanks, everyone.
Also, if you do want these slides, I'll have my email address at the end, and you can just let me know and I'll send them to you. They even have my pattern on them. So you can see all the things I intended to say and then did not say during the talk. I will, of course, never read them again.
Okay, good.
All right, so what do I mean? Animation? There we go. So what do I mean by the rules of the game? Okay, so the default mode of group decision making is an open, freewheeling discussion where hypothetically everybody contributes and there's this lively debate and you come to a good decision. And I said hypothetically because of this. The reality is that the default mode of decision making favors me, right? Favors people who look like me and act like me. Loud, brash, member of the dominant group. And so what you see is group settings where 2 or 3 people effectively control the outcome, and everyone else gets sidelined. So what you have, instead of a meeting of minds, right, is a meeting of the minds of the most powerful. And that's not really what we want at all. So this is why I like a decision-making framework. A decision-making framework is a formal statement and process for how your group makes decisions. Right? So what it wants to do is remove this open, freewheeling process, right? The process with no structure, no rules. A process where people can dominate it unevenly. By putting the process into place, we ensure that everyone in the group, from the boldest to the most quiet, gets equal time to talk. No more jockeying for attention, talking over each other, or shutting people out. Now, before we can talk about a framework I suggest, I want to talk about things that affect individuals' behaviors within groups. So it ends up being really important for your function in a group to have an idea of some of these things. So here's the plan for the workshop. I'm going to give you some ideas about power and privilege, which are both pretty loaded terms, but they're really important concepts to understand how people behave within groups. Then I'm going to discuss conflict, basically how to deal with the conflict which is inevitable without causing harm. And from there, I'm going to give you a proposed framework for decision making. And there'll be plenty of time, ideally, at the end for questions, so make sure to write down any questions you have that come up, or feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to ad-lib an answer without getting thrown way off. It'll be fine, I promise. So we're going to start with talking about power and privilege. And like I said, I know these are loaded terms, but they're terms that you have to understand if you're going to be a successful member of a group. So in an ideal world, people all have equal sway. But we don't live in an ideal world. And so we have to work pretty hard to get there. And that's why we start by talking about power and privilege. Now, I'm pretty sure that you all have an informal idea of what constitutes power, right? And so this definition here is specific to the group decision-making context that we're talking about today, right? Power is an imbalance in the effect that one person can have on a group's decisions. It is really easy to recognize when people wield power in a group, right? If you are on a board of directors and there's a chairman of the board, despite having officially no more power, frequently they wield more power. But it's much harder and yet more important to notice when people have less power in a group. It's the people with less power in the group whose participation needs to be fostered by the people who have more power. The other concept here is privilege, the stuff that we get or don't by virtue of our circumstances. And there are a lot of privileges that I could experience, that I could list here, and I'm going to name just a few. Being born in a middle class or higher family, having good health, having gone to college, having been born somewhere without significant environmental toxins, being able to rely on law enforcement to protect you. Everyone has privilege. There are all sorts of privileges. But recognizing it and understanding it is really important to understanding the dynamics of your group and how you fit in them. And it doesn't make you a bad person, right? Having power or privilege is just a neutral fact about human beings. It just means that there is an imbalance in your group. What you do about that balance, that's what matters. So unchecked, imbalances lead to serious negative effects. Certain people take over the group, well, like I've mentioned, other people don't get to participate at all. So like I said, that's not a meeting of the minds. That's a meeting of the minds of the most powerful. And so in a second here, so they didn't give us handouts. My handouts aren't here, so I'm going to have, hopefully everybody's got paper they can write on. In a second here, I'm going to ask you to think about your own power and privilege. It is going to be private. You never have to show it to anybody. But before I do that, because I know how uncomfortable it is, I'm going to hang myself out to dry for a bit here. This is a small selection of privileges that I enjoy, right? I have never experienced gender or ethnicity-based discrimination. I have a middle-class upbringing. I have really good connections that got me into undergrad and grad school. I didn't experience food insecurity. I'm relatively good-looking. Same connections for college got me several jobs. I know you're laughing about being relatively good-looking, but I didn't earn this, right? At all. This is what I mean. Exactly what I mean. I've got health insurance. I'm a native English speaker, and I grew up in 2 of them, but 2-parent homes, right? And some of my sources of power. I have an impressive title, right? I have a graduate degree, and I'm a member of the dominant group in society. And what does this do? What are the effects that I have to look at? Well, turns out I take over conversations, and I'm really used to getting my way, and I'm really used to having people clean up my messes, literally and figuratively, right? And oh boy, I have done this talk like 10 or 11 times in the last 3 days just to prep for this, and I still hate this slide. Right? But it's the thing I have to look at and have to face in order to make sure that groups don't have too much of me. So, I'm going to ask you to do something similar for yourselves, which is this. I want you to pick some group that you're in. There's a section labeled exercise 1 on your handout. There is not. So I want you to consider how you are positioned, power and privilege-wise, compared to other people in that group. Right? I want you to think about, and you might find that even with specific people, there are things that you enjoy that they do not, and vice versa. And so the reason I want you to do this is because this is present in every group that you're in, right? And in some groups, you may be the dominant person, you may be in this position, and in others you won't. And without seeing that, you can't combat it. So this reflection, like I said, is private. I am not going to have us discuss it as a group. I'm not going to ask you to hand it in. If you want, you can destroy it immediately. I just want you to do it and be as open and as honest as you can. If you do feel like you want to talk about it, I've got some consulting hours left, and my contact information will be here as well. So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start timer. I'll give you guys a second to settle in. So, like I've said, having power or privilege doesn't make you a bad person, right? The question is realizing when you have it, and how you've learned certain behaviors from it, and then using your power to balance the group, not to create or perpetuate the balances. Conflict is the other thing I really want to talk about here. When I was in grad school, I took a workplace dispute resolution class, and yes, I'm the kind of person who finds workplace dispute resolution really exciting. And on the first day, the professor had us all list the most recent conflict that we had had. And everyone had an example, and the vast majority of them, people who hadn't just gotten out of bed, were all from that day, right? Conflict is everywhere, it is inevitable, and it's the thing I want to talk about. So, I need to distinguish between conflict and harm. In your groups, in any group, you're going to have lots of conflict. Lots of places you disagree, lots of places that, exist, and if the conflict didn't exist, you wouldn't need to be here. But harm is really different, right? Harm, a negative, lasting effect of something like that, something someone said or did that was actually directed towards you that hurt you, that's different, and that shouldn't ever happen in a conflict. Unfortunately, it does, obviously, and as much as we try to avoid it, we all screw up and hurt people. You are going to hurt people in your groups, right? It is inevitable, basically, with any sort of time period that something's going to go wrong. And if you do harm someone, your instinct rather, is going to be to fix it. And you'll probably start by apologizing, which is great, right? I endorse everything here, wanting to fix the problem and apologizing. But make sure that the person you harmed actually wants you to apologize. Don't compound harm by forcing an apology on them. If you do apologize, acknowledge your actions and how they caused harm. State how you'll be better in the future, and don't ask for forgiveness or absolution, right? When you've harmed someone, the last thing they need to do is make you feel better. And under no circumstances should you excuse your behavior, right? This is an apology, not an equivocation, not a justification. So, what causes harm? All sorts of stuff, right? Like not keeping your discussion to one topic, straying off to whatever you happen to be grumpy about that's also there, or making things personal, attacking the other person rather than discussing the topic at hand, or not using I statements, right? Rather than saying I feel this way, saying it is this way, or saying you always do this sort of thing, right? And just generally, yeah, being a jerk, right? But like the thing that really causes a lot of harm in these group contexts is when you don't shut up and listen, right? So that's what I want to talk about next. I want to talk about a skill called paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is a listening technique that forces you to do exactly what I just said. Shut up and listen. And the way it works is this. You listen to what the other person is saying, and you take notes. And what taking notes does is forces you to get your mind out of your response, get your mind off of what you're going to say, and focus, because you're doing two things, right? It's multimodal learning, as my old boss would say. You're both writing and listening. And then you tell them what you heard. And then you get the clarification from them, which most likely will be, that's not quite right. And you run through this again and again until you have got it right. And boy, it can be pretty uncomfortable, which is why I'm going to make you do it right now. So we're going to partner up in sets of twos. We've got 2 prompts here. We're going to take 5 minutes for each one of them. And yes, I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you. The last time I did this, nobody laughed. And I was like, this is inherently ridiculous. Whoever person 1 in the group is going to discuss whether or not they believe a hot dog is a sandwich. And person 2 is going to discuss whether cereal is a soup. I'm going to give you 5 minutes for each one of these. If you get done early, switch. If you get done with both, do the opposite roles. So the idea again here is to listen and take notes of what the person is saying, then repeat it back to them and get their clarification until you've got it right. And I'm just going to emphasize the taking notes part is really important, so please do it. It's really easy to think you're listening and not do the taking notes. So, do we have an even number of people? I've lost track. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yes! Awesome. So my first question is this, and I know the answer. How many of you finished it by the time the 5 minutes were up?
Yeah.
Awesome. Not that's the case, I'll tell you that. Okay, so how many of you paraphrased correctly on your first try?
I think we did okay.
All right, pretty solid.
May I ask you some
Take
clarification?
about 2 tries total. Anybody have to go more than a couple times? Yeah. So there's really nothing wrong with that, right? And the reason that I want to do this exercise is to show, like, it's actually pretty hard, right? It's hard to really listen to somebody and really nail things down, right? It's the reason I tell you to take notes is because you'll listen and you're taking notes and you look at your notes like, I don't remember them saying that, right? So this exact technique is something I'm going to ask you to basically do as we talk through the decision-making framework. That's why I do run through it this way first. I do have two rather obvious and important questions. So by show of hands, I want to know who thinks a hot dog is a sandwich. All right, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so slightly less than half of you. How many of you believe that cereal is a soup? Yeah. A quarter of you. All right, that's pretty good returns for cereal, honestly. It's not a good soup.
What about oatmeal? That's
Yeah.
a whole dynamic.
Oatmeal's a stew,
Look, gazpacho doesn't have a broth.
but it's still cooked.
Yeah.
And what about bettridge-wiese? Oh no! Next slide. So, no, there is no resolution. The reason I ask these questions, right? There's no real answer. I joke they're the pressing ontological questions of our age. We can talk about
What if
them
we had to
for
come up with a
long
decision about one of these topics right now?
Oh, I'm not doing that to you, I
Can we
promise.
build consensus around that?
I doubt it. The reason that I do all this stuff before we actually talk about a decision-making framework is you're going to see it come up. You're going to see this paraphrasing. You're going to see spots where I am actively trying to counteract the decision-making structures that we have lived with for basically recorded history and probably before that, right? And without doing all of this pre-work, we can't really get into this framework and have it work because you don't quite have a vantage on why we're doing these things. So before we get going again, I want to talk about these core values one more time. Well, it's not one more time, that was a lot, but again, which is this, right? Decisions should be made with input from the whole group. Every member of the group should have equal voice. Conflict is inevitable, but harm is not. And participants should be actively engaged in achieving these goals, right? Like I've talked about, we have a lot of history with practices that undermine these. And that's why I like to use a decision-making framework. It is a tool that actively pushes against the structures that we're used to working with. Because using the framework lets you break out of those patterns that have perpetuated the status quo. All right, here's an overview of the framework. I have a bunch of these printed out on cards that you can have after the session. We're going to spend the rest of the time working through this. So we start in this process in a very formal manner. And one of the things that you're going to hear me say is like, I'm trying to avoid ad hoc process. I'm trying to avoid freewheeling discussion. I'm trying to avoid the things that we have done, doing the things the way that we have always done them. Because the way that we have done them is tremendously underserving many people, right? So we start by officially calling for a decision. It doesn't have to be a gavel. Whatever method your group has for saying this is the thing we're making a decision about, this transforms you from from chattering at each other to actually making a decision. And once you call for a decision, you need to identify what your goal actually is. So the question is never if one person's proposed tactic is correct and someone else's is wrong, right? The question is what the best way to reach your goal is. And we get stuck here. We get stuck like one level below what we actually need to talk about a lot, right? So if you're discussing whether or not to do a direct mailing campaign, your goal is probably attracting new donors or getting your current donors to give you more money, right? So keeping your goal in mind helps keep your head out of minutia and can enable some decision making and, that word that means when two people, anyway. Wow, total blank on. Anyway, it allows you to synthesize people's positions. I'm just like gonna run best risk here, into other things that work better. So the next thing you do is actually choose what kind of decision you're making. And I'm gonna suggest that you are most likely to make one of three kinds of decisions. Now, these are not the only kinds of decisions that will ever come up, but these are the ones that you're gonna see the most. The first is a situation where only one person in your group cares about a particular point. This gets overlooked a lot, where one person cares and you still spend a bunch of time making a decision about it. If one person cares about something and no one else does, go with them. Decision is made, they're happy. Most of the time, you're gonna end up in a situation where you essentially can make a majority rule decision, right? There's disagreement present, people have differing feelings on it, but nobody's going to be heartbroken if they don't get their way, and it's not a matter of institutional life or death, right? There is a third one, though. This is the one that eats up a bunch of time, and you have to be really careful about. But these are situations where the decision is so important that everyone really does have to agree. So an example might be if you're running a nonprofit and you're going to select the new executive director of your nonprofit, you should probably be on the same page. When I was in the arts, the orchestra that I worked for, the rule was the entire board had to agree on the selection of the music director because it was that important for the orchestra, right? Be really judicious about when you use this kind of decision. They will eat up tons of time. because you will just cycle and cycle and cycle until you come to a decision. So how do you actually pick what you're doing? Well, like I said, you're most likely able to just use a majority rules decision, but you do need to check for the other two circumstances, right? So take the temperature of the group and see who cares about it, which can be as simple as asking, okay, who cares about this, right? And check to see if anybody thinks it needs to be a unanimous decision by saying, does anybody believe this decision needs to be unanimous? So the thing is that you really do have to specifically ask these questions, and the reason for that is this. Members of marginalized groups are way less likely to speak up in either of these situations, right? If you are expecting people who are in your groups to just speak up when they feel either of these ways, people who have been traditionally marginalized probably won't. So, if you are a member of a dominant group, then it is your responsibility to foster their participation. You need to reach out to them directly. You need to make sure that they are involved. You need to make sure that you are hearing from all the voices in the group. Like I said, everyone should have an equal say. Everyone gets a chance to talk. So now it's time for participants to state their positions. Remember how I said I don't like an open, freewheeling discussion? This is what we do instead. Everyone in the group gets a chance to speak, 1 to 2 minutes, uninterrupted. Everyone else in the group is taking notes. And please, I'm so serious about this. Everyone else in the group is taking notes. This shuts your brain off, right? You're listening. You're not thinking about your response. And no one is allowed to interrupt. The next thing that we're going to do right here is ask questions. And we're going to, again, we give people uninterrupted time to ask their questions. One by one, people in the group ask the questions of the other members. You don't have people questioning people one by one. You don't say like, okay, now we're going to ask all of our questions of John, because that puts John on the defensive, right? Sorry, I'm just calling you out, John, because I remember your name. So what happens there is you create this many-to-one situation where somebody is just, it basically feels like they're being ganged up on. So when you have one person ask the group questions and then move on, then it's discussion. I do want to say here though, if somebody's acting in bad faith, if somebody's asking questions in bad faith, if they are undermining people, if they are insulting people, if you can tell that they are just playing devil's advocate because they are a giant pain in the ass, shut them up, right? One of the things I want you to think about a lot is that the health of your group is everyone in the group's responsibility. And if somebody in the group is being toxic, it's poisoning your entire group. So head that off. Question?
Do you have a suggestion on how to shut them up?
Yes. I tell them, I mean, like literally just say, I believe that you're acting in bad faith, please stop. Right? Yeah, don't, so like, I think you're probably pretty used to being really nice in groups, right? So being really nice is awesome, but being really nice doesn't stop toxic people, right? Toxic people are going to take advantage of the fact that you're nice, right? And so I would love to always be kind, but if someone is acting in a way that is harming other people in the group, there's no niceness. There's like, I don't give quarter there, and I don't think you should either.
Well, and also you want to create a safe space for other people. Absolutely. So maybe it's saying that.
I see multiple hands went up.
Oh, I just wondered if by calling the toxic people out, you're empowering the others to speak up too.
One hopes.
Pretty much what you're saying, yeah.
Sorry, one more question. Sorry, do you want to wait?
It looks like we're doing 2 questions right now, so it's good.
I just keep thinking about this. Who's moderating all this, or is there a moderator?
So this is, right, these are groups that don't have moderators, right?
Oh, okay.
Because, so like, it's great to have a moderated group, but the
That's power.
right, the vast majority of your groups don't, right? If you've got 3 people and you need to figure out what you're making for dinner, right? You don't have a moderator. Unless you really have somebody who loves being a moderator and like, just like steps out of all decision making in your circles, you're gonna have to make these decisions as groups.
Because the moderator cannot also be a part of the decision.
Cannot be part of the decision because they have like the power.
So I agree, but I will say that in some of our projects, there is a facilitator that also helps with decision making. And I know that kind of goes against what you just said, but I want to clarify that sometimes the technical assistance, or if you're working on a project for food systems and you come together and you're convening on a project that you're doing together, it seems like sometimes the facilitator and the person providing technical assistance for the project is doing both. And it's super hard to wear both hats because of everything you're talking about. But if they're not also the ones that are connected to the end result, I feel like they can do both hats. So
they can. I don't like it, right? And one of the reasons I said at the beginning, like one of the things about this talk is that it's four groups that all have equal sway. When you end up in these circumstances where you have like a bunch of advisors and certain people make decisions, then you're in these really complicated area decision-making schemes that you do end up in a lot. But this stuff is actually like way more common than I think most of us realize, because most of it we get into these, like I said, open freewheeling discussions. A decision comes, like a couple people come to a decision and suggest it to the third party, and then they say, hey, you know, party 3, is this okay with you? And they've never heard what party 3 actually wants, just if that thing is okay, right? So once you've heard from everyone, and everyone's gotten to ask questions, you get to hear from everyone again. And the reason for this is that, like, sometimes you just change your mind, right? Like, hey, that's great. Ah, there's the word I was looking for, compromise. Sometimes people have heard things, and they come up with good compromises. So going through the circle again, it's going to be faster for sure, because a lot of people might even just say, like, you know what, I haven't changed my mind about anything. Or they're going to say, this doesn't actually matter to me as much as it matters to you, so I withdraw, right? Or I see this middle ground between our two things. And once you've done that, now you can get you've got like a really good sense for what the problems actually are. Because some things aren't problems. Some points you'll have agreed on, right? So we take a spin around again. And you know what? I know this feels silly, and I know it feels formalized, but the reason it's formalized is that we're really bad at doing things without processes, right? So let people talk about the things, the points of agreement and disagreement that they see, right? You know, I hear that we agree on these things and disagree on these. And sometimes you might be surprised that some people hear your disagreement or agreement when it's not actually there. So write these things down, right? Any points of agreement are great, but the points of disagreement, you want to write down what options have been expressed. And here, again, as you're hearing these things voiced, you might say, I go for a compromise, a word that Adrian remembered again. At that point, write those down. So you'll have this range of options, and at this point, you really do get to decide which one to take. Okay, so for issues where only one person cares, you've already shelved those. For majority rules issues, just take a show of hands for each point. If you're in a group where people aren't comfortable voting by show of hands, and this does happen, then take a secret ballot. There are situations where people in a group will not feel comfortable opposing other people in the group. If there are really strong power disparities, or if somebody's just plain scary, right? If you've ever been if you're in a school project where there's just one person who's just straight a bully, and you tried to do this, you still wouldn't get equal chances, right? So keep your eye open for when you need to use a secret ballot versus show of hands. Then, if you have unanimous matters, you either have all agreed by this point or you haven't. And if you haven't, it's time to repeat steps 4 through 7. Until you do, or until you agree that today is not the day that decision is being made this way. If the person who asked for the decision to be unanimous is okay with it no longer being unanimous, you can shift to majority rules matter. Otherwise, table the discussion. Like I said, unanimous issues should be pretty rare. I do think if you really end up spinning your wheels, personally, to just move on and make a decision, because I like getting things done, but be careful that that's not trampling people, right? And so the last thing I want to do is talk about how you actually get one of these frameworks into action. So to start with is this. People with power and privilege have to be the ones responsible for this. Members of marginalized groups cannot successfully advocate for these things in very many situations because of the exact power imbalances created, or exact imbalances created by power and privilege. So if you are a member of a dominant group, it is your responsibility to make sure that you create the situations of equity that we're talking about. When you are advocating for one of these decision-making frameworks, I recommend, again, focusing on these core goals that we discussed today. And you can be as explicit about it as you need to. You can just say, right, I want to make sure that we have a circumstance where decisions are made with input from people with the whole group. Anyway, that every member of the group has an equal voice, where conflict, when it occurs, doesn't cause harm, and where everybody's engaged in achieving these goals, right? Just spell it out. Establish your frameworks in a written document that everyone can refer to. Pardon me. I really recommend that everybody signs it, right? Just like a contract. If you're on the board of directors, put it in your bylaws, right? Make this a formal process. Again, we're avoiding ad hoc and informal processes. For bonus points, you can consider something like a swear jar for interruptions. You will get a lot of pizza out of people until they clean up their acts. And with that, we're pretty much ready to wrap up. So I do want to leave you with this sort of handful of things that I think are the key takeaways. First, people with power and privilege must be engaged in creating environments for quality. Second, we use decision-making frameworks because without them, we default to structures that have enshrined power dynamics forever. Third, not all decisions need to be complicated, right? If one person cares, just go with them. Fourth, do think about what other situations you might be able to use this sort of framework in. One of my mentees at the University of Illinois, he established a framework as a lab partner that determined when they called for help from their TA, because they were taking too long before deciding whether or not they actually were stuck. So they set a time limit on it, and there's the decision. And finally, most important, if the rules of the game are getting in the way, change the rules. I have a little bit of consulting time left, or you're free to contact me either at adrian@twowave.com, 415-890-2wave, or on Twitter at 2wave. I will happily send you my slides. I'd be happy to talk about anything if there's any way that I or 2wave can help you out. And I don't remember what time this was supposed to start. Looks like we have about 15 minutes for questions if anybody has them.